us that have been used to the idea that the U.S. is going to be number one forever in the car business, I think is changing. And in fact, I think with our weak sales this year and the sales in China, that may even
already changed.
It's already changed.
Yes.
And we'll see how over the period of time, but there's nothing like a billion plus people and this rapid emergence of the population into the middle class has been just an absolutely incredible story. We have a question down here in front. Somebody can maybe pick that up. But in any event, let me start with a quick general question. What are the 2 or 3 greatest challenges facing the plug-in? And I recognize that each of you come from very different perspectives, but Richard, why don't we start with you? I mean, obviously the consumer is important.
Well, I think the 2 or 3. I think the primary challenge is getting the price point down through mass production so it can spread more completely through the population. And I think, the second thing would be that most consumers don't quite understand how the infrastructure would support a plug-in today. And I think that learning process could be speeded up by the industry promoting this knowledge more generally, especially about the electrical issues involved in home recharge.
So there's a real educational issue here that's required.
And I think the third issue has to do with the environment. The environment poses a great advantage to the early adoption of these vehicles. And in my research, it's not that they fear dependence on foreign oil, or it's not that they want to pay less for gasoline. Most people that are interested in plug-ins really are focused on emissions. And I think that continuing the focus of public policy on reducing emissions will help plug-ins tremendously.
Okay, Henrik, your comments.
Well, obviously, we are at sort of the infant stage of starting to really introduce plug-ins, and the consumer, I think, right now have not really been explained exactly what it is, and probably that's also due to that there's many different approaches for the car makers. I'm not even sure everybody has really agreed on what we even call it. Some people call it EREV, some call it plug-in hybrid, what we do. Right. And there's probably a lot of other words out there as well. So I think there's a lot of consumer education that's going to happen over the next couple of years. I also think that the actual plug, if you have a garage and obviously you have a plug, but there is, of course, a lot of people who live in apartment buildings and have a garage underneath that building. And I think the next step is to start equipping these buildings with plugs and probably some sort of safety system that nobody else can go in and use your plug and your electricity. Maybe it's a credit card, maybe it's a code, whatever it is. And I think that's almost the first step rather than, and then probably the next step is going to start having charging stations on the streets, etc., which is, of course, the bigger infrastructure. But really that first step of understanding, what about people who live in the cities who don't necessarily have a garage, with their own house. So there is a certain growth that's going to happen, but I think there's enough people out there right now who have garages and who are ready to start using these plug-in hybrids.
Yeah, I think the one key point that you made is that this is probably more the urban, suburban type of person versus somebody in a rural community. Justin, how about your comments?
I can echo basically the comments of these gentlemen. But, I can't emphasize enough the education component is big on the consumer side. I mean, through our research that we've done at UC Berkeley and UC Irvine with our current plugins, as well as the stuff done by Davis and Synovate and others, there's really a lack of deep knowledge of really what is a plug-in and what the benefit is to the consumer. And so it's hard for them to judge. There's a lot of excitement about it because they see the potential, they understand that there's something there, and they can make a difference. But they don't really know what it is, technically what it is.
Of course, there's a risk, as was pointed out, there's a lot of confusion because of the different types.
Absolutely.
And I suppose there's a risk then of creating over expectations too that are hard to deliver on.
And that's one of the fears that we have is really building that. And we're already seeing that today in some of the stuff that's going on. So how do we educate the consumer and really make them understand what the benefit is and their impact? I think that's one of the key components. But as Dr. Curtin mentioned, we also have to really worry about cost. We have to make sure that it makes sense and that the consumer is going to be able to afford it. And that, to understand cost and how to balance the cost, it really comes down to how you configure the vehicle. And there's, since we haven't defined universally what that is yet, there's big variability in what that cost is. And it's very hard at this stage to really convince the consumer it's the right choice when you have, all ends of the spectrum. So it's a balance.
Good. Dr. Wu?
Yeah, for the Chinese consumers, I think the top two reasons I've seen Bain & Company, the consulting firm, the survey, the number one is price. Because this is, as I mentioned, this is replacement. They're deciding between an internal combustion engine and a plug-in vehicle, if you will. So the cost of total ownership has to be on par with internal combustion engine. So the consumer segmentation, according to the survey I've seen in the US, about 60% is high-end customers, about 20% are green champions, quote unquote. And in China, 60% are price-sensitive segment, and 20% are green, are the high-end. Okay. So it's a different demographic.
It's a very different demographic. That's very interesting. This is a question that can go to whoever wants to tackle it, and maybe there's several questions. In order to reduce cost of plug-in electric vehicles, does it make sense to offer lower range, upgradable battery options? Maybe, the early stage you could buy a 10-mile battery, maybe then 20, 30-mile battery, rather than aiming for 40, 50, or 60 miles. And then I would add, on top of that, what are your projections? If we just say 40 miles of range in a mid-size type vehicle, what do you think the cost is going to look like, say, in 5 years or 10 years of that battery? Or what should it be to create a really high volume environment? And I don't know who wants to tackle that first.
I think I predict we will probably see that just like we have different types of vehicles today, whether it's a minivan or a small car, a sports car, I believe that we will have electric vehicles and plug-in hybrids, which also are considered different type of vehicles. So you may have a plug-in hybrid which only have a 10-mile range, and it will make sense to some people who only, their workplace is maybe 5 miles away. And that's fine with them. And then you're going to have maybe other plug-in hybrids which has 50 miles range because people are driving more or a longer distance. So I could totally see that happen. I think also the type of vehicle, the demand when it comes to power, I don't think we're going to see people in the future, because they have an environmental vehicle, that they necessarily want to give up the power or the fun of driving and everything else. So I think ultimately we're going to see different type of vehicles for different needs. I don't think there is one answer where suddenly that is the range.
So it's not likely that we're going to see a given vehicle that has 3 or 4 different battery options, but more likely different vehicles with different batteries to suit those individual tastes. Justin, yours?
No, yeah, I agree with that. The challenge with trying to design a vehicle that can handle many different battery options for the consumer is how do you manage the battery and how do you manage the power electronics? As you get bigger and bigger batteries, your power electronics requirements change, your heat characteristics change, and all those are optimized for your battery system. And so as you start increasing that and changing that variability, your cost is going to go the wrong direction, because now you have to increase your component durability, you have to change its thermal behavior so that it can handle these larger, bigger packs or whatnot. And then we can go on forever about how that's going to impact your FMVSS and other crash testing.
Okay.
So from a cost balance point of view, you'll probably see more of an option with different platforms.